war was lost. Our world, built on promises of a 1,000-year reign, had crumbled into dust in a matter of weeks. But one piece of the old world remained: fear. We had been shown the posters, heard the speeches. They told us of the savages in American uniforms, a terrifying threat from a distant land. Now they stood before us. The engines of their trucks rumbled, a low growl that mirrored the terror in our hearts. They were to be our guards. We were completely at their mercy. By the spring of 1945, the Allied war machine had crossed the Rhine, tearing into the very heartland of Germany. The final, violent chapter of the war in Europe was being written in the rubble of its cities and the churned mud of its fields. In this landscape of total collapse, armies were not the only things in motion. Millions of people were adrift: displaced civilians, liberated prisoners, and surrendering soldiers. And among them, a unique category of captive: the female auxiliaries of the German military. These were not frontline combatants, but the women who had served as the nervous system of the war effort: telephone operators, administrative clerks, and Red Cross nurses. Stripped of their duties and now prisoners of war, they were being herded into temporary holding areas, their futures uncertain, their minds still clouded by the fog of a dying ideology. For over a decade, their reality had been shaped by a relentless, state-sponsored campaign of indoctrination. This propaganda was not subtle. It was a carefully constructed architecture of hate, designed to build walls inside the mind, and no image was painted with more terrifying colors than that of the Black American soldier. They were portrayed not as men, but as primitive brutes, a subhuman danger to be feared above all else. This was not just a political message. It was a ghost story told to an entire nation, a primal fear embedded so deeply it felt like instinct. Meanwhile, the men tasked with managing this logistical nightmare were themselves living a profound contradiction. They were soldiers of a segregated United States Army, specifically a quartermaster company. Their war was not one of dramatic charges or heroic last stands. It was a war of numbers, of supply chains, of moving people and things from point A to point B with unrelenting efficiency. They were the lifeblood of the advance, yet they fought for the freedom of others while being denied full equality themselves. They wore the uniform of a nation that judged them by the color of their skin, and they performed their duties under the constant, watchful eye of a command structure that held them to a different standard. And then the two worlds collided. As the German women were marshaled into lines, they saw their escorts for the first time. The reaction was not one of mere apprehension. It was a wave of visible, palpable shock that rippled through the crowd. Whispers turned to silence. Women clutched their meager belongings closer, their eyes wide with the terror they had been conditioned to feel. The monsters from the posters were real. The ghost story had just walked into their lives, holding rifles and giving orders. But the orders that came were not the brutal roars they had expected. The soldiers moved with a practiced calm, directing the women with simple gestures and clear, unemotional commands. They organized the lines, performed a head count, and prepared the trucks for boarding. There was no menace, no cruelty, no hint of the savagery they had been promised. There was only the mundane, almost boring procedure of military logistics. This stark disconnect between the ingrained fear and the observable reality created a profound confusion. The foundation of their terror, built on years of lies, had just met the simple, unassailable truth of professional conduct. And in that moment, a small, hairline crack appeared in the solid wall of their indoctrination. The journey had not yet begun, But the war for their minds had entered a new and decisive phase. The trucks idled, their exhaust painting fleeting gray clouds in the cool spring air. The order was given to board. A wave of hesitation went through the line of captive women. Every step toward the dark canvas interiors of the vehicles felt like a step into the unknown they had been taught to dread. They moved slowly, mechanically, their eyes fixed on the ground, avoiding any direct contact with their guards. The soldiers, for their part, simply waited. Their posture was relaxed but alert, a study in military bearing. They were not aggressors. They were handlers, overseers of a process. This patient professionalism was, in its own way, more unsettling than outright hostility. It offered nothing for their fear to latch onto. No confirmation of the terrifying caricature they held in their minds. The monster refused to show its teeth. Then came the moment that would unravel everything. One of the older women, burdened by a heavy satchel containing all she had left in the world, stumbled as she tried to hoist herself onto the high truck bed. She struggled, her face etched with a mixture of exhaustion and frustration. The other women watched, frozen by a combination of pity and fear. Intervening felt dangerous. Suddenly, one of the younger black privates stepped forward. He moved without hesitation. He didn't speak a word at first. He simply reached down, took the heavy bag from her hands, and placed it inside the truck. Then he turned back to the stunned woman and offered his hand. It was an unmistakable gesture, a universal symbol of assistance offered from one human being to another. For a long, silent moment, the woman stared at his outstretched hand as if it were an alien object. This single, simple act was so profoundly at odds with the entirety of her indoctrinated worldview that her mind struggled to process it. This was supposed to be the savage, the brute, yet here he was, offering help. Hesitantly, she placed her hand in his, and he easily helped her into the back of the truck. This small drama, played out in the space of a few seconds, sent a shock wave of disbelief through the prisoners. The lie was not just being contradicted, it was being gently and quietly dismantled before their very eyes. As the journey began and the trucks rumbled down the scarred German roads, the transformation continued. The soldiers shared their own rations with the prisoners. They passed around crackers and tins of food, items of immense value in a starving country. They spoke to each other in normal tones, their conversations punctuated by occasional laughter. They were simply men doing a job. The ideological collapse inside the minds of the German women was not loud or violent. It was a quiet, internal implosion. The monstrous image that had been drilled into them for years, the cornerstone of a hateful belief system, simply dissolved. It was replaced by the face of a young man offering a helping hand, by the taste of food shared freely, by the sound of ordinary conversation. The fear that had gripped them just hours before was replaced by a profound and unsettling sense of shame. They had been lied to. The entire edifice of their world, built on such monstrous falsehoods, had been proven hollow by a single act of kindness from the very people they were taught to despise. When the trucks finally arrived at the processing camp, the women who disembarked were not the same ones who had boarded. The physical journey had been a few dozen miles, but the mental and moral journey had crossed an entire universe of prejudice and hate. They had witnessed firsthand that propaganda, no matter how powerful, cannot permanently extinguish the truth of shared humanity. In the final, brutal days of a war that had cost millions of lives, a small battle was won not with tanks or bombs, but with the simple, disarming power of human decency. It was a victory that would never be recorded in official histories, But for the women who experienced it, it was perhaps the most significant lesson of the entire war.